Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 4 of drafting pleadings and appearances. And the content of this lesson is common for both the old and the new syllabus, so I suggest both the syllabus students can actually benefit from this session. We'll also have a detailed discussion on guarantees, hypothecation agreements, outsourcing agreements, service agreements, e-contracts, and then leave and license, will and gift. This is the entire coverage of this lesson. Now, talking about guarantees. So, what is a guarantee? A guarantee is nothing but a promise, where a person who is giving such guarantee, that is the guarantor or the surety, promises to make the payment to the creditor in the absence or in the failure of payment by the principal debtor to such creditor, right? So, it is a contract to perform the promise or discharge the liability of a third party in case of his default. So, surety, principal debtor, and creditor are the three parties in a guarantee. So, now take an example where principal debtor and creditor are there. Creditor has given 10 lakhs of loan to the principal debtor for which the guarantor or the surety had given a guarantee. If principal debtor fails to repay such money to the creditor, then the creditor can catch hold of the surety for the repayment. And the moment surety pays back the money to the creditor, then the surety will enter into the into the shoes of the creditor, and this is what is called as subrogation, right of subrogation, right? So, I mean, these are all too technical, but what you need to remember is that in case of the default of the principal debtor to the guarantor, then the surety will become liable to make the payment. And the moment surety had made the payment to the creditor, surety will now become the creditor. And he can take the money back from the principal debtor. So the essential principle you need to remember here is that guarantor paying money to the creditor does not do away with the liability of the principal debtor. Principal debtor's liability will now shift from the creditor towards the guarantor because the guarantor had made the payment to the creditor. So that is what is the contract of guarantee. Correct? So the surety is the one who gives the guarantee. Principal debtor is the one in respect of whose default the guarantee is given, and the creditor is the one to whom the guarantee is given. Right? So there are several types of guarantees. Those are counter guarantee. So what is a counter guarantee? A counter guarantee is one where the principal debtor gives guarantee to the surety. So in this case, surety has given guarantee to creditor, but in counter guarantee, in return, the principal debtor also gives guarantee to the surety for making back the payment to the surety. That is what is called as counter guarantee. Fidelity guarantee is a guarantee where a guarantee is being given for the performance of an employee. So where a person gives a guarantee for the performance of an employee per se, in the sense that not the performance of technical performance, but for the character and conduct of such employee, that is called as fidelity guarantee. Continuing guarantee, it is when a guarantee is given to a series of transactions. So where a guarantee does not end with one, but a various series of transactions, it is called as continuing guarantee. Performance guarantee is given when is said when a guarantee is given for the actual performance of an act or performance of a contract by a person, that is called as performance guarantee. Bank guarantee is given by a bank on behalf of its client or the account holder, and such guarantee is given to the person with whom such client has a contract. So what essentially happens is the client will enter into a contract with a third party for the supply of goods or something, for which the client has to make a payment to the third party, and such supplier will come, and this bank guarantee will be issued in the name of such supplier. So supplier can be guaranteed that there is a guarantee backed by the bank. So in case of even failure of amount from the company, the bank will pay, right? So that is what is a bank guarantee, right? So there is essentially a bank, its client, and the supplier of the client or any other person. So client will take goods from the supplier. Instead of money being paid from client to supplier, the supplier will take the money from the bank. The bank will deduct the money back from the customer. So this is what is the concept of a bank guarantee. So this understanding has to be there. And apart from this, one more important concept which I want to discuss with you in terms of the guarantees is the concept of consideration in a guarantee. If you observe, what is it that the surety is getting in case of a contract of guarantee? The principal debtor is getting money from the creditor. The creditor is getting interest from the principal debtor and the repayment of the principal. So those two are having the considerations. That I agree. But when it comes to surety, what is the consideration he is getting in order for him to be a surety or a guarantor? Is he charging something from the principal debtor? The answer is no. But will he be made liable in case of default of the principal debtor? The answer is yes. So what is the consideration he's getting for for him to be a surety? And in case of no consideration, the contract should be void. Correct? And hence to address that, the Contracts Act has clearly specified that in case of a guarantee, the consideration between the principal debtor and the creditor shall be a good and adequate consideration for a contract of guarantee. So this consideration itself is a good consideration or a valid consideration for a contract of guarantee also. Because the act said so, these contracts are valid. If not, the guarantee should not be valid because there is no consideration the surety gets. Hence, the act has clarified that the consideration between the principal debtor and the creditor is a valid consideration or a good and complete consideration in terms of a contract of guarantee. So this you need to remember. Now talking about hypothecation agreements. So hypothecation necessarily, you would have seen many cars which state hypothecated by the State Bank of India, correct? So what is happening there? So imagine a car. So I know it's no, not at all in the shape of a car, but just imagine that it is a car. You want to buy it, correct? But you don't have money for it. So what will you do? You will go to the bank, take a vehicle loan and say keep the property as security. And the bank will actually do it. The bank will keep this property as security, and that contract is what is called as hypothecation. And hence hypothecation is only on movable properties, and it is not regulated by any statute in the country, right? It is usually through a general law of contract. It is not even from bound by Indian Contract Act or Transfer of Property Act, because the possession is not with the person who is giving the loan. The possession is completely out. It is given back to the borrower, correct? So in hypothecation contracts, the possession is given to the borrower. The property will be in the title of the lender. The lender will have the title over the property. Unless last payment is being made, the lender will enjoy the title over the property. Same is the case if you can better, and for you to better relate Ola. In case of Ola, Uber, where at times they would be financing certain vehicles, correct? So where you will take the vehicle, you will run the vehicle, but the title will still be with them. Unless you make all the payments as per the contract, that is hypothecation agreement, your title will not be transferred in your name. So this is about a hypothecation agreement. Coming to outsourcing agreements, this is one of my interesting and very practically relevant agreement, because in any company, certain non-core services will be outsourced. For example, in Maruti or in majority of the car manufacturers, except for the chassis, or rather the engine, even the chassis also is outsourced except for the engine, because the engine is the soul of any car manufacturer. Rest of all, right? So let me put it this way. Imagine a car manufacturer who owns engine and design. So design of the car will be owned by him, engine will be owned by him, rest of everything will be outsourced. What is meant by outsourced? So you're sourcing it through some external. Out means external agency. That is what is called as outsourced. So it is contracting out of a company's non-core, non-revenue producing activities to specialists. So there might be a certain manufacturer of car doors alone who is expert in manufacturing of the car doors. Car glasses, so there is a guy who does purely car glasses. Give him the design, he delivers you the glasses. There would be someone who would develop the chassis. There would be someone who would develop the entire body of the car. Car seats, the cushion, there might be someone who would deliver the cushion. Air conditioning might be from someone, music might be from someone, right? So all of these together assembling is by someone. So imagine a car manufacturer who develops an engine, who develops the design, but outsources car glasses, lights, seats, that is the cushion, air conditioning, music system, tires, and all of these together, there are various suppliers of all these particles, and all these suppliers will supply their respective particles based on the design which has been given to them, and the assembly will again come back, will be done in the car manufacturer's locality. So this is what is the concept of an outsourcing. So here there will be two major players, outsourcer and service provider, correct? Among all other terms of the contract, that is the terms of quality of supply, date of supply, what happens if the supply is not made in the deadline, right? All these practical aspects will be dealt in my course, which we will do it separately. That will not be covered in this YouTube video. It is a separate course where we will go in detail how the clauses have to be drafted, right? So now the outsourcer is the manufacturer himself. In our case, the owner, I mean whoever is doing it, the service provider will be the people who will be doing a respective service alone, which is being outsourced. So in addition to all the standard clauses, I suggest two clauses which you need to remember in case of an outsourcing agreement. One is a non-compete clause, two is a confidentiality clause, right? So non-compete, why? Because if where the contracts, I mean where I'm giving you the designs of the doors or whatever, you can end up leaking it to the competitors of my business. So that is what is confidentiality. So whatever I disclose to you, it should not be disclosed with anyone. If you do it, I would come back to you big time and you would be held liable for it. So that is confidentiality. Non-compete. So what is non-compete? So if we are in the same line of business and I make you and I ask you to manufacture some product, of course not in the core, it may be non-core, but still there is a chance that you can become my competitor, right? So in such a case, this contract should also specify that for the next 6 months you should not come under car manufacturing at all, right? After terminate, you can terminate this contract at your wills, because that is, no one can prevent you from terminating any contract. But after termination, for a particular period of time, you cannot compete with me. That is what is called as non-compete clause, right? So these two are very important clauses in an outsourcing agreement. I hope this has given you adequate understanding of outsourcing agreements. Service contracts. Now, service contracts are plain and simple. Do not try to complicate it. It is a contract purely between an employer and an employee, be it a company secretary, be it a managing director, be it a manager, be it anyone. The service contract would be between the employer and the employee, that is the company and the employee. And such service contracts will essentially cover the time of your employment, the period of employment. Are you employed for a particular period of time, that is for 2 years, 3 years, or is it for a indefinite period of time, and you can be terminated at any point of time? So the term of employment as well as the reasons for termination. How can you terminate the employment? The remuneration, perquisites, duties, what duties you have, powers of the employee, leave entitlement, working hours, what is the working hours, and apart from it, termination. As I told, where you want to terminate your contract, that is you want to resign, what will be the notice period, and if they terminate, what should be the notice period, and for which, if they are terminating, will they pay you some compensation if you want to go immediately, or should you pay them some money because you want immediate termination, you can't serve the notice period? All those terms will be covered in a service contract. So remember it, this is what is the contract. Do not complicate it beyond this. E-contracts. So what are e-contracts? E-contracts are the contracts which are entered into in electronic mode. So see, your contracts where you sign and scan it, that is not an e-contract. I'm sorry. Signing it merely doesn't necessarily mean it's an e-contract. So usually e-contracts are where you use digital signatures to sign. That is what is an e-contract. Correct? So now these are also accepted as per the Indian Contracts Act and also as per the Indian Evidence Act, which allow the evidences to be submitted as in electronic mode. So there are three major types of e-contracts. One, click wrap or web wrap agreements. So what is a click wrap or web wrap agreement? So this is an agreement where, if you remember, I mean, if you can recollect, when you're using any when you're using any system, I mean, when you are opening your Google account, let us say. So when you open a new Google account, at the end of after giving all the details, there will be one checkbox, right? It will be like this, where it says, I have read and understood all the terms and services or all the terms and conditions. And when you click this box and click submit, this will wrap the agreement between both of you. That is what is called as click wrap agreements. So this is an e-contract which you have entered into even without affixing digital signature, even without doing anything. Just by a mere click and submission, you have effectually accepted all the terms and conditions of such contract. That is what is called as click wrap agreement. Second is shrink wrap. So again, recollect your good olden days where you would have inserted certain CDs in software in your systems, right? For games, EA Sports Cricket, I mean, that's my favorite, but any such games which we install, right? When we install the games, before we install, it asks, I understand all the terms and conditions, move further, finish. If you say no, so there will be certain licensing terms saying that you cannot make a copy of the CD, you cannot sell the CD outside. We never read, but yes, there are various terms which have been specified there. If any of the term is not, you're not able to, you cannot agree to such terms also, you can't do much. You have to give back the software and take back your money. That's all you can do, right? So those contracts on which these are preloaded in a particular modem, and when before you can install it, you would be posed to allow, I mean, you would be asked to submit yes. Such contracts are called as shrink wrap agreements. Correct? The moment you click yes, then if you remember, the dialog box will shrink. Right? If you clearly recollect, if you are a person who would have installed a software, the moment you click finish, it shrinks and a new dialog box opens which will install the software. So those are called as shrink wrap agreements. And finally, electronic data interchange. This is very interesting, right? So for this, I would recommend you to imagine a situation wherein there is a company A and there is a company B. Imagine company A is in Delhi, company B is in Rajasthan, right? So there is a factory in Rajasthan for which the raw material is being supplied from Delhi. So what happens is there will be a system at the production or the manufacturing facility of B in the factory. That mission, let us say it is in the form of a computer. This will record the available input, or rather the available quantity of the particular raw material, and where the quantity comes below the minimum which you have to maintain, immediately a message will be sent from this system to the system maintained at the supplier. And at the system maintained at the supplier, immediately there would be a requirement of a demand. I mean, they would demand for more raw material. So this system says we need more raw material within so and so date, and this system here will check whether the facility at A is having such raw material or not. And if A feels that yes, there is this adequate raw material in our facility, then the system will automatically say yes. I mean, of course, this will be driven by a lot of softwares. The moment the system says yes, this system will further communicate it to the logistics of A. What does this logistics do? It will arrange for supply of this raw material to the facility of B. So when the logistics is being applied, when will the logistics go ahead? The logistics will go ahead only when they get confirmation, right? So is there a confirmation? No. Till now, the only thing you have is the intimation that the raw material has come down from B, the supply. I mean, there is a need for raw material from B, and A has the raw material, correct? So now what happens is after A communicates its acceptance of existence of raw material, that communication will go both to the logistics and will also go to the B. Then what will B do? B will then issue a purchase order. So here there might be an intervention of a person because he has to issue a purchase order. I mean, click yes. So a purchase order will be given to A. And this purchase order given to A will then be communicated to the logistics department here at A. Then the logistics department will deliver it to the premises of B along with an invoice, and this invoice will be demanding payment from B, and this invoice also will be communicated electronically, and the moment invoice is accepted at the premises of B, the monies will be transferred to the bank account of A automatically through a system driven mechanism. So this entire concept is what is called as electronic data interchange. If you have seen how the data has interchanged between two systems, so electronic data interchange is necessarily a mechanism where data is interchanged between two or more systems without any human intervention, right? So this is all about electronic contracts. Now let us spend a bit of time on leave and license agreements. So leave and a license agreement is an agreement where the licensor allows the licensee to temporarily occupy and use one portion of the immovable property for carrying on his business. This I'll give you in a very simple example. Let us say I have a huge factory, but I am using machinery only till here. There is a machinery I have installed, but this is of no use for me. Literally, I'm not using anything. My capacity is sufficient for this machinery is sufficient for my capacity. So why should I waste this? So what I'll do is I can approach my own competitor himself and say, boss, I have a manufacturing facility and wherein this machine is lying idle. If you can want to manufacture, you can do something. And such manufacturer will enter this property, correct? They will send their people on this property. They will send their raw material on this property. So where do they get their permission from? They get their permission from A Limited, which owns this property and the machinery. And such permission is what is leave and license. Leave legally means permission. License means permission to use something. So leave and license combination will be used usually in places where I give a property to the other person to use alone, right? Like only constructive possession is being given, whereas the jurisdictional possession, that is the original title and the juridical possession, would still remain with me. I would giving you the permission, that is leave, and the license, that is to use this particular machinery and my premises. This is what is called as a leave and license agreement, and this is also very prevalent in industry, usually in pharma industry, where the competitors also would be given opportunity to come and manufacture their own goods as per their own formula. Their own men will come and they will take care of the manufacturing in my premises, for which they pay me certain money. So this is what is called as leave and license agreement. Will. This is very interesting. So will means the declaration of the intention of a testator with respect to his property, which he desires to be carried into effect after his death. So very important learnings here is, firstly, there is a testator. Correct? That is point number 1. Testator is the person who makes a will. So the person who is writing a will is called as a testator. Second, what is he writing this will for? In respect of his property. Correct? Number 2. Third, what about the property? He wants that whatever he is writing about the property will be taken into effect only after his death. So these three are very important. A will means my last will. Before I die, this is what is my will, my wish, right? So will is something which is made by a person who is called as a testator in respect of my property. How should my property be distributed after my death is what is will all about, correct? And hence it shall be in writing and it shall be attested by at least 2 witnesses, right? As I said earlier, witness attestation requirement mandatory in case of a will, and there is no need of a stamp duty on a will. When it comes to registration, even registration of a will is mandatory. However, it is still highly recommended to have a will being registered. So what is a codicil? When you make a will, but you want to amend it, such an amendment or alteration is called as a codicil, right? And remember, a will made by a person can be revoked at any time during my lifetime. So if I make a will, I can revoke it at any time during my lifetime before I die. And the last will made before I die, or the latest, which is very closest to my date of death, will be the will which shall be valid. Even if I make 1,000 wills, the 1,000th will made at the latest time before I die is what will be the will which will be valid. And then there are 2 types of wills, privileged and unprivileged wills. So privileged wills are the wills made by the army and the navy who at the time of war, they are at war and they cannot obviously go in search of a paper, write something and sign and get an attestation. So even if they make it, even if they write it anywhere on inscribe it everywhere, anywhere, or even if they communicate it to their colleagues that this is what I want to, this should happen this way, then even then that would still be a valid will. So that is what is a privilege we have given to the people who are trying to protect our lives at the borders. That is what is a privileged will, and all other wills are called as unprivileged wills. And then coming to the procedural aspects of a will, let me take you through few procedural aspects of a will. So in a will, since I die, I need to authorize someone to execute my will, right? So he is called as executor, who would execute my will. Usually, like high net worth individuals will appoint their family lawyers to execute the wills, and they will execute the will in accordance with what has been written in the will, right? Next, uh, in case I don't appoint someone to execute, then the family members, if they find any problem in executing it among themselves, they can apply to the court for execution of the will, that is for appointment of a administrator, that is called as letters of administration or letters of administrator. Then the court will appoint someone as an administrator or an executor in the absence of the testator, that is me appointing a executor. And what is a probate? A probate is a order giving authentication to a will. So where you submit a will before the court of law, then the court will pass an order which is called as a probate, which gives the legality to the will, which gives the finality to the will. So that is what is the concept of a probate. So these are the very important aspects of will. Talking about gifts. So gifts are regulated by Chapter 7 of the Transfer of Property Act 1882. Correct? Right. And then to understand more about the gifts, it is important to know the definition of the gift. So what is a gift? The Transfer of Property Act defines gift as the transfer of certain existing movable or immovable property made voluntarily. So very important aspect is voluntarily, and to a person called as a donor or to any other, and it is accepted by behalf of the donee. So they have to accept it, and if such acceptance has not been given and he dies before that, then the gift shall be deemed as void. So what are the essential features of a gift? So it has to be voluntary, absolute, and unconditional. There shall not be any consideration involved, and it shall be accepted by the donee, and it shall be made only for existing property. Any gift of future property shall be void. Correct? So if you cannot give any gift of a future property, and can you revoke a gift? No, you generally cannot revoke a gift. However, the exception is in a gift deed, there can be certain clauses on which you can agree to revoke or suspend the gift on happening of any specified event. Correct? But such event should not be dependent on the will of the donor. So, for example, if you take an example where I give you 1 lakh as a gift and say 90,000 is for you, but 10,000 I can take back at any point of time. This means the 10,000 is the gift which can be revoked at any time at my will. Such things are not allowed. That cannot be a gift at all. It will be void. Right? Now, coming to the gift of immovable properties, remember, any immovable property, irrespective of its value, shall be registered. That is what is the Transfer of Property Act says, and it has to be attested by at least two witnesses. At least two witnesses shall attest it. Just like, sorry, it need not. Just like your will deed, it also has to be attested by at least two witnesses, and stamp duty is also payable. So this is about registration, attestation, and stamp duty. So where you are gifting to two or more persons, and if all the donees are accepting it, then yes, the gift is valid. But if one or more donees do not accept, then the gift shall not be valid only for those two, but it shall be valid as for the others. Correct? Now, one thing which you need to remember here in terms of revocation of a gift by Muslims. So under the Mohammedan law, there are certain cases on which a revocation of gift cannot be possible. So usually a Muslim can revoke a gift even after the delivery of possession. However, in the following cases they cannot. And when is it that? It is usually in a case where it is within the prohibited degree of relationships. That is, by a husband to a wife or vice versa, or it is related to the donor within the prohibited degrees as second. And third is the sadaka. That is, you have made it as a charity. Correct? Or where the donee is dead. So you have already given a gift and donee is dead. Now you cannot take it back, and which has already been passed out of the possession of the donee, you cannot revoke it. Where it is lost or destroyed, yes, you cannot. Where it has increased in value, you cannot. Just because it has increased in value, you're taking it back, right? So it cannot happen that way. And if at all various alterations have been made on the gift, suppose you've given a gift of a land property on which I built a huge complex. Now you cannot take back the land property saying that I can revoke it. Not possible. or where any exceptional situation you have received also something in exchange for that gift. So I have gifted you this, but I have received something else. So the other person might have gifted you some other flat somewhere, right? Technically these two are like a consideration only, but two different gift deeds have been made, so not possible, you cannot revoke a gift. So this is all about gift and gift deeds. So thanks for watching the video. If you wish to learn more on how to draft, or you want to practice various exercises to sharpen your drafting skills for your examination and also for your practice as a trainee or as a company secretary, please fill in the information in the form which is provided in the description below. We are coming out with a course very soon. Thank you. Stay tuned to Virtual Law, and this is Prakul signing off from VL Academy.